That's basically like a very basic intro to GraphJS. Then we will do some LST, land surface temperature data processing within the temporal framework of GraphJS. And for that, we will use a Jupyter notebook. And after that, once we have generated like different indexes, different variables that are related to mosquitoes, so we will be modeling mosquito distribution. Once we finish with this processing and generating new variables, we will move to an R notebook, and we will call graphs from there, and we will do the modeling there, the prediction there. Then go back to graphs and see our results as well. So the idea, the main idea of the workshop is to share with you how we combine like Python, graphs, R, Maxent, and so on and so forth into notebooks. Okay, and we are not even opening the graphs tool, so it's all like script. First, I wanted to say that Anna and Vasek will be answering questions like online in the chat. So for people online, please post your questions there, and Anna and Vasek will be answering, or we can like share and we discuss about it. First of all, because it takes some time, we have set it, the notebooks within something called the whole day. It is like an online service that Anna and Vasek discovered. So you need to like sign in with, I sign in with my Google account basically. So you can do the same meanwhile, and search for our workshop there, and you will have to kind of copy it to your profile once you are logged in. So just Google the whole tail, log in, and search for that one. Because the copying and importing takes a little while, so then we are ready. Once we reach that, we will be ready. Right? Zoom, yeah. Is that enough? You tell me about. Can you read from there? Yes? Okay. Please let me know if you at least are there, found the place, found the. Well, Anna and Vasek in any case, which will then if you want to also follow the notebook without, let's say, executing the code or so, all the notebooks and the presentation from yesterday are in this website. So it's basically my GitHub and then Graphs and CSU 2023. And you will have the lecture there, slides from yesterday, and then all the studio notebooks. So here you can see like the intro, the first part, the processing data in Graphs, and then the modeling in R. Okay. Shall I start? Yeah, okay. Very enthusiastic public. Well, I guess because you are here, most of you have used GraphGIS before, or at least have heard about it. Otherwise, it's like Masha Ganana. Yeah. Well, so some basic notions. GRASS-GIS stands for Geographic Resources Analysis Support System. It was born here in the States, originally developed by the US Army. And the first edition of the user manual was published on July 29th of 1983. So this July, we will be coming 40 years. So we are the longest standing open source GIS project. If you are interested then in more history, you can go to the website and so on and see the videos we like related by William Shatner and so on, very, very 80s style. There are a large amount of tools available in GRASS, in the core part of GRASS. There are more than 500 modules, and then you have more than 400 extensions that you can add. So to add functionality to the core. It has a graphical user interface and a command line interface, and then many other libraries, Python libraries that you can use either to create your own modules or to script your workflows. And there is also connection with R, GIS, web services, and so on. And of course, as being a GIS, it supports different types of data like raster, vector data, raster 3D data, so voxel, volume, pixel, and time series as well. I would say when GRASS 7 came out in 2015, I think it was the official one, it was the first open source GIS with this temporal functionality. So back then it was something really, really novel, right? For a GIS. Now, since as of version 8 of GRASS, we have modified the startup. I don't know if you ever open GRASS 7, that you got a startup screen, you have to pick things there and no one understood what was it. So basically we've got rid of it, and now the software opens like any other software. You don't have to pick stuff at the beginning. It just opens, it creates the default structure of folders that you need to work in, right? And now from the data catalog, you can manage, you can browse through your folders and your files, like your maps, as in any other file manager. Now, this folder structure, or what we call database, is needed because GRASS has a native format for raster and vector data. And so you either import your TIFF files or your GeoPackage files into GRASS, or you link, but they need to be in this database structure, right? And why is this? Because once you start working in GRASS, you need to define in which coordinate system you are working. And this is what we call locations or projects. It would be equivalent to a project in which all data is in the same coordinate reference system, right? And then within those locations, we have another folder that we can call sub-projects, or in the traditional GRASS terminology, they are called map sets. And there you can organize, I don't know, this different study areas or different topics, like, for example, you have a map set for temperature data, then you have another for vegetation data, and so on. But there's always one map set that will be there, and it's called permanent. And this one will hold the information about the coordinate reference system of the location, right? And in this map set permanent, like if you use GRASS shared with other users, permanent is the place where you put common data as base maps, rivers and roads and things like that. So every user can access that. Right? You can then follow up. I wrote some links there in case you are interested. Yeah.
Can you put on the screen again the name of the client in wholesale?
Sorry. Yep.
I'll get it back. And it's also in Zoom.
I think if you just write RAS, you will get 2 results, and then you pick this one. Is that? Did you copy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Put the link in the chat.
Okay. Then, so the database structure then is one of the important things. Basically, also because when you start GRASS, you basically start in a path, right? To these folders. Another fundamental concept of GRASS.js is the region, the computational region. And this has several advantages in the sense that in other softwares, you have to like clip your data and so on. And here you just use a command, set a region, make your test there, and all your outputs will be that region. You don't need to cut and create copies and copies and copies. But it is tricky because it's usually the first error that we face, that the data is not in the region that we have set, or it's not in the default region, or we want the statistics, but we are somewhere else, and so on. So if you ever face an error in GRASS, first check the region, and then you can move on. And then vector data is always like imported and processed like completely. So the region does not affect vector data, but it does affect raster data. So you can import your raster like full extent, but if you do some processings, the output of that processing will have the extents and the resolution of the region, of the computational region that has been set in that concept. We will be working mostly with rasters, so this is something that we have to take care of. Then GRASS has a particular way of organizing modules or functions, and it was letters that make reference to either an activity that you do with the module or the type of data that is the input of that module. And in that way, we have like G dot something for general management of data within GRASS. Sorry. Then D dot something for display, R dot something for raster, and so on. So we will be working quite a bit now today with the T module. So T dot something for temporal data. Okay. And then there are a lot of extensions, or what we call add-ons, that you can install with G dot extension. Okay. There are add-ons in a central GRASS.js add-ons repository, but you can also develop your own add-on and host it in your GitHub, and someone else can install from there, as long as it has like the proper structuring to be installed like that So with G extension, I can install extensions from another user that created one. Okay. This is really powerful. Now, well, this is the newest GraphJS interface with a single window mode, thanks to Linda. So now it's everything there. It's really nice and long. And the command line that it opens once you call Grass as well. For some of us, it's really like comfortable to just type commands there. It's easier. You can call Grass even without the GUI, only the terminal or only the GUI. Well, there are different than Python libraries delivered with GraphJS, and in the next part of the studio, we will use two of them. One is the grass.script, which provides Python interface for GraphJS modules. And the other one is grass.jupyter, thanks to Caitlin and Anna and Bashek, which offers like different classes to visualize maps within Jupyter notebooks, makes it much easier, let's say. And there are others, including one called PyGrass, the temporal framework, and so on. And we can use Python, within the Grass, the graphical interface. So we can go to this tab here, the Python tab, and we can call modules there using GraphScript. Or we also have like a simple Python editor there where we can type our scripts. Or basically we can just use the IDE that we prefer and script there, or with Jupyter notebooks. So there are plenty of ways. So it's to the taste of the user. And then you can also, this is the third part of the studio today, you can also connect Grass with R through this rgrass package. And it's very similar to grass.script for Python library, because basically it's like a wrapper for Grass modules. So you run commands such as exec grass, and you put kind of the command there, but in a R syntaxis. And you can call R or RStudio within a Grass session, like in the terminal, or you can initiate Grass from R, right? So it's more or less the same, different language with Python, I mean. So again, today then we will remember that what we saw yesterday, this workflow that we are using. We will split it like in two parts. So there's the Grass part where we will be importing the species records. So this part, I use my finger, sorry, like this. So the species occurrences, then we will also create background points. Once we reach there, I will explain further. And we will be deriving different variables from this LST time series. Okay, so we will be working in Grass in this part, the species occurrences, and in this part, the predictor response and predictor variables. And then within R, we will read our data. We will read the occurrences, the background points, and the raster predictors. We will model there and do model evaluation and visualization of results. To then finish with writing back our results into the Grass database and checking that it is effectively there. Okay. And we will be using records of Aedes albopictus. It's an invasive mosquito originally from Asia. And I would say nowadays it's pretty much everywhere. In this case, we will be using data from northern Italy, where they are pretty concerned about it. This mosquito is competent vector of dengue and West Nile virus as well. And the records were obtained from the Global Biodiversity System. It's an online database where you can get occurrence data from mostly every species in the world. And then we will use this average daily MODIS LST time series that was reconstructed with the method that I showed you yesterday as well. And it was kindly provided by Mundialis. It has 1 kilometer spatial resolution, and it is already converted from Kelvin to Celsius degrees. Well, this is all done for you already, so you don't have to worry about this. This is already created within the wholesale system, but if you ever want to run this yourself, here are some instructions to prepare the folders, okay? This time series is already in allocation, so it's already prepared for you. Now, there are different ways, tons of ways to get help in GraphGIS, because once we read all this, it's like, oh. If it is the first time, especially. So you can get help for manual, you can get with g.manual, you can get help for like all the manuals, all the functions, or you go to the RAS. You use -- help or -h to get help for a module in the terminal. In the website, there are tons of tutorials and notebooks and so on. There is also the GRASS Wiki, of course, the mailing list. It's pretty low traffic nowadays, but it used to be much more. And then in every manual, you have a link to the source code of that manual if you want to investigate further. So you can easily access the code of the module, and you also get a link to the history. So you can see the different modifications, who made them, and so on. And I also put here a lot of other that I consider useful links, and they are mostly other tutorials and other courses and so on, if you are then interested in going deep and practicing more. Okay. So this is the end of part 1. Have you finished with the importing of the? Okay, that's great. If you don't want to like execute commands, you can also follow here, right? So you have part 2, and there's a part in which we give some concepts and then we start working. So you could also follow there if you want, okay? But it's better to run them. So in the second part then, how do we handle the break? We finished this one, no?
Sorry.
Okay, perfect. So we finish this one, break, and then we do the last one. Well, in the second part then, we will go through the processing of the occurrences. We will generate background data, and we will use this MODIS LST time series. So before going into that, Have you ever used the temporal modules in GRASS? One is there, you too. And the others? No, okay. Well, as I was saying at the beginning, let me increase this. GRASS was one of the first, or the first, FOSS GIS that incorporated these temporal capabilities to manage, analyze, visualize spatiotemporal data. And it is very interesting because it also allows you to compare the temporal relationships between different time series or between maps within a time series. Okay, so you can have like overlapping maps in terms of temporal interval. Right? Now, all this framework, this temporal part, is all based in metadata, and it's not duplicating information. So you have your maps within GRASS, and basically within the software there will be a SQLite table in which you will register, like record the information of those maps, especially the date they start and the date they end, if they represent an interval, and that's it. And then that metadata there allows you to call, to make different selections, different lists, aggregate different the maps that you want, let's say, all the Januaries in series, or all the first weeks of every year, right? And this is very powerful because it's with just one command, you get everything you want with the right where condition. It takes, so based on metadata, it takes a snapshot approach. So it adds the timestamp to each map. This is the metadata we're talking about. And then a collection of timestamp maps makes a time series, right? And we call them space-time dataset. So then when you have raster or vector is struts. Sorry, space-time raster dataset or space-time vector dataset. And when it's 3D, it's a bit more complex to pronounce. And this is really cool that maps within time series can have different extents and different like spatial extents and different temporal extents. So, and here, for example, the region becomes quite significant because you can have, let's say, scenes of Landsat or Sentinel, and sometimes Landsat, if your study area, for example, falls, let's say, in a corner of one of the Landsat scenes, then you have potentially 4 or 5 scenes that could cover that area. No? And you can register all of them in a time series, and then you set the region to your area, and it will be, all the output will be just cut perfectly to your area. So it is powerful. And again, the temporal modules are organized like the others. So the T dot something is for general temporal data management, like listing, creating, registering, and so on. And then you have T dot rust dot something for raster time series, T dot vect dot something for vector, and so on. And some other very important TGRASS notions are that the type time or the temporal type can be defined as an interval. So you have start date and end date. Like, for example, LST products that are, for example, 8 days or 16 days or 1 month. Or it can be just, they call it point, but instance is the right word, for time instances. And this is the case of a satellite image, right? So we only have the start date when it took the image, and that's it. So you get start date, and then you get empty end date. Okay. And then time can be absolute time. So the dates as we know it, like calendar dates. And the minimum resolution we can represent is 1 second. And you can have relative. So say you do simulations, you don't care which date it would represent, it's just a unit of time. Or yes, a unit of time. Like 4 years, 90 days, 1 day, 10 minutes, whatever. Then there's also one important concept, which is called granularity. And the granularity is the greatest common divisor of all the temporal extents within the time series. So when you have, for example, LST products from Modis, they have, for example, this interval of 8 days. No, so it starts January 1st, 8 days, 8 days. But at the end of the year, you don't have 8 days. You have either 3 or 4, 5, depending if the year is leap year or not. And to register that time series properly, you have to consider that. So you have to restart your intervals every January 1st. Then you will have some maps of 8-day granularity. And the last map of the year, it will be 4 days or 5 days, if it is leap year. And then the common divisor of that will be 1. Because if your time series is long and you have leap years and not leap years, then it's 1, right? So don't freak out then when you see like an 8-day time series and it says granularity 1. Okay? But it's really useful then when you want to aggregate data, because you have daily time series, for example, and you want to aggregate it monthly. So the commands that we will see later, you just say granularity 1 month. And it will take care of organizing your data because it has the information. So it will organize your data and aggregate it month by month. Okay, and estimate the mean or the whatever statistics you want to estimate. And the other important concept, especially if you are working with different time series and you want to relate them, is the topology. And it refers to the temporal relationships between time series and their granularity. Okay, and then you have like different relationships, like if they are equal, it's equivalent, and it will depend on which time series you step on, let's say either one or the other, A or B in this case. And so it's equivalent if it's for both the same, or then it's overlaps, during and contain. And we will use, I think, one of them. Okay, so kind of to summarize the TGRASS framework, we have the GRASS database where we store a raster vector data. And there's also a temporal database where these rasters, vectors, and so on are kind of registered with their metadata, especially the date. Right? And then from our rasters and vectors and so on, the workflow goes like this. You create the time series, which is an empty SQLite table, with a command called equate. Then you assign timestamps to those maps. Okay, so at the beginning, it will be empty, right? No information. Then you assign timestamps. So once you pass information to that time series, it will give you, okay, general start time, the end time, some statistics, resolution, and so on. And then you can start working. Basically, if you pass the registering part, that sometimes is tricky, depending the dates of your data, then you're ready to go. And you can visualize, you can list and extract different parts of it, select different parts of it, get statistics, aggregate, accumulate, perform temporal algebra operations among time series or within the same time series and so on. And then there are a bunch of extensions or add-ons, also special for time series, but some are not, let's call, not within the temporal framework, but they are useful. Like, for example, the R-Hunts module that performs harmonic gap filling of the data, the local weighted regression that also is useful to perform interpolations, temporal interpolations, and so on. Good. Okay, now we are almost there. As I said before, we will be using the Python packages in this part of the session. So we will use grass.script library and grass.jupyter library. There are some options of how to use these functions within the Grass script, and it will depend on the output of the command, of the Grass command. So in general, we use run underscore command, and then we put in between parentheses the Grass part. So again, it's like a wrapper, no? Or if the output of the command is text, we can use either read command or parse command. And if we want to pass text to the command, we can use write. Okay. I think throughout the notebook, we will mostly be using run command, like execute. Okay. We are generating mostly raster data. And in any case, here you have like the link, so you can go through more documentation about the modules. And then we will use grass.jupyter and the functionality there to display the maps with base maps in an interactive way within as well. Good. So we reached the part that we start doing. Any questions? No? Okay. Now we go to the dashboard, the whole time thingy. So basically to start it, I went here, open a separate tab or window. And it opens a Jupyter Lab instance with all the files.
So I guess at this point, we should check everyone
Yes.
is there. Just not here.
Here.
Yes. Yeah, so you have to sign in. That's one thing. And the other thing is you have to, if it's just still importing, there is a trick if you don't play. You in the top left corner, there is go to dashboard. So you go back to dashboard. You will see your tail there. You click that again. And then when you come there again, not important. We're done. And then you can run it, and then it will get you into that window in Jupyter Lab for launching.
Yeah, is everybody there? If you are not, then you return to the report up there.
Like that we can.
Because I had this, you know, like you just get.
Okay, once you reach there, as you said, open here, open in a separate tab or window, you get this Jupyter Lab tab, where you can see all the files and folders of the project. This is basically the repo where I was working. And you can here either run things from consoles, right? You can open a terminal, for example. It should open a terminal. So we can see files here and so on. It's a Linux terminal. You can open a Python notebook. Okay, like a Jupyter notebook. Like A equal A. Why is not writing? A equal 2 im A im. Or you can also open like R notebooks, which are very similar. You just write R there.
I just want to go.
Oops. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
And what we will be using is a Jupyter notebook that is already created in the folder. So it's this one, the notebook example remote sensing grass, IPython notebook. So it has basically the same that we saw before, displayed in a kind of ugly way. And then we start with the hands-on. And as you see, it's basically a Jupyter notebook. And then we will also use RStudio in the last part of this studio. Right? Here I went to visual to get a better looking our notebook. So it basically opens RStudio, but online, like RStudio server, I guess it is. And you get the console and everything the same. And there's also like a kind of explaining part. And then again, you have the cells to run. To run cells in RStudio, we either click here and it runs the whole chunk, or you go line by line with Control Enter. Okay. And in the Jupyter notebook is with Shift Enter, you execute and go to the next one, or Control Enter, you execute and stay there. But Shift Enter does not work in RStudio. So it just creates an enter and it splits your code. Is it more or less clear, too messy? So once you are there, once you go, I go again. Here, okay, it opens Jupyter Lab and search for this one. Notebook.
If you can either zoom in or tell us which.
Yes, I was about to do. Okay. Yeah. So you go to this one, notebook, example, remote sensing grass. And search for the extension IPy and B. No? because there's a QMD. So we discard it.
Who can see that?
Who is there?
Who does that?
You're still importing the thingy? Okay, I'll wait a couple of minutes. Yes, no, I brought, but then I should change the mic. And I want to show the t-shirt. People online will be having fun. What did she do? Okay. It does not work yet. Okay, okay. Okay, then we are ready to go.
So, how do you access the RStudio?
Okay, yep. From the launcher, RStudio. Click. And here, what I did, okay, here it is open. No, let's close it. What I did is file, open file. And I found it here in workspace. And wait, this one. But we can go back to this in the last part. So for this one, don't worry. You don't need to have it open right now. Close many windows open. So we are all there. Okay. This basically, the first part is basically to prepare the directory structure, provide some variables, like where the GRASS executable is, which is the GRASS data folder, like the GRASS database folder, which is the location, which is the map set that we will use. We check the GRASS installation, and then finally we reach the point in which we start GRASS. Okay, so just run this. Here we are basically creating a folder where we will be storing our location, our GRASS data, our location, and some other data. So we execute that one. We have the version 8.2.2 installed here, compiled. Then we get where the Python packages are, and this is needed afterwards. And here we finally import the two GRASS Python libraries that we will be using, and we start GRASS, okay, with gj, that's difficult, gj.init, we start GRASS, and you see we pass. In the end, it's similar to what we have in GRASS 7, this startup window, because we pass basically the directory where the GRASS data is, the location, and the maps that we have defined here. Okay, GRASS data, location, and maps. Okay, so GRASS needs to start in a folder, and this folder must be maps. Okay, so we're there. Now, we will start by just exploring a little bit what we have within this Italy LST daily maps. Okay. So let's check which type of vectors we have. So we have the borders of Italy. So you see here, there are some commands within the grass.script library that are not only like run command or read command, but some of them, those that we use a lot, like listing maps, are commands or functions in themselves. So GS list grouped, and we pass in which map set. Here. We pass the map set, and then we have only the vectors for that map set. Okay. Now we can use the map class in the Grass Jupyter library to create a picture, let's say, a map of one of these borders. Okay, so we will use the country borders. And this is what we get. Okay. So Caitlin will be able to explain it better because she wrote it. But this is like the non-interactive mapping class, right? I know. It's just to create a picture. And we use a function similarly to what we use within Grass. So within Grass, we use d.vect, and here we use d_vect or d_grass to add maps to this plot. And we show. Then let's list the raster data available. And you will see it's LST, in this case, 2014, the first day of the year. So this is DOI and average. Remember yesterday I told you we reconstructed this time series and there were 4 MODIS passes per day. So basically this is the average of those 4 passes. Okay. And there are like 1,800 maps, more or less, in the time series. We don't get the thing here. Oh. But I can like remove the output, no? Or
You right there.
where?
On the if you right click on the output on the LST,
Here,
clear output.
clear output. In, okay, yes. Otherwise, we will be scrolling down forever. Okay, but basically you have an idea. It's from 2014 until 2018. It removes the executed thingy, though.
Well, it's fine. It was executed.
Okay. Yeah, we don't need it anyway, but okay.
It didn't really display the entire list. It just gave me it wasn't that long.
Okay, so it is somehow shrunk. Okay. Good. So now we will display one of these raster maps with the interactive map class. And this gives us a base map that we can choose. So here I just put OpenStreetMap, but there are other options. And in this case, the functions are, instead of drast or dvec, it's like add raster, add the layer control, which is to get the to mark the layers that you display, like turn on and off, and then the show. This takes a little bit longer because it has to reproject the map, create the PNG, and Caitlin, you can always correct me if I say something. So our maps in the location were in the European coordinate reference system projection, but you need to reproject this to, yes, it's that long or is 3380?
It's the.
The Mercap. And here you have the controls. So you can turn it, if you have more layers displayed, you can try adding a couple of the maps or 3 of the maps and you turn on this one.
Where did you set the region? Or
The
how-
region,
how is that set?
yeah. I didn't set it here because it was already set in the map set.
Okay, it's from that set.
Yes, it's already there, but we can take it by that one. So here in notebooks, you can also use
But
but
you can use GS.
yes,
GS.3.
I wanted to show that you can also use.
Okay, well, okay.
Yeah, so you can also use bash. If you put the exclamation mark, the region -p. All right. So this is the coordinate reference system of the data in the map set. And we have the extension of the region and the resolution. So it's in meters, metric system, rows and columns and so on. So it's basically set to the subset, the square subset of the map. Good. And when you set like here, yes, here, you said use region true, because let's say we have like a very large map, it would take forever to project that data, reproject that data and so on. And you can change that region to a smaller one to see a small part. Okay, good. Okay, so that was kind of an exploration of the data available in the map set. Now let's move to our workflow, to the species distribution workflow. And the first part, we will be tackling the occurrence, importing species records and creating background data. And then we will move to the predictor variables part. Okay, but I think it will be. I hope. Yeah. Okay. I already prepared this data for you. Basically, I used in advance a command, an extension, an add-on, a GRASS add-on called v.in.py.gebif. So it's basically an extension that goes to this database and searches for the species that you want in the period of time that you want, and it takes the region that you have set and it only searches in that region. Okay. But I put the commands here for you in case any of you is interested in species distribution modeling and want to test with other species or for your own studies. Okay. So we won't be running this. This is why it is commented, but I already prepared the data for you. And it is there in the system. And so we only need, so it's a geo package, we only need to import it into our maps. Okay. So here, as you see, we use this run command. And basically, in a sort of Pythonic way, we pass the parameters, and parameters are the name of the module, the input, which is the geo package, and the output, which is the name that the vector will take within a map set. So we run that and we will add this to the previous map. Okay, so in this case, we use add vector. Okay. Yeah. So those are the presence records from Geospatial. There might be more. These are the known ones in this database. Presence records for Aedes albopictus. It's also called the tiger mosquito. I tried to search for North Carolina, but there were not so many records in the database. And that's why that's good. Yeah, well, it is either good or is people not reporting them. For example, if you search for Argentina, there's really little data. Really little data. So people is not used to report there. It is so costly to get field data that once you have it, it's people sit over it. Okay, so we have our presence records. The next thing we need when we use Maxent, which is this maximum entropy model, is what we call background data. This background refers basically to the available environment for the species. So you have the presence, is the locations known that the species is using, okay? And those points will have certain environmental characteristics, but we also need to characterize all the rest in a way for the model to compare which parts of the environment is the species using according to or regarding to whatever else is available. Is there a difference? Does it use everything or does it use only areas with a certain threshold of temperature, ranges of temperature, and so on? Okay, so this is what's happening within Maxent. It basically compares the environment where the species lives versus the environment, the whole environment available, or a sample of the environment available. Okay, so these are the background data is not absence data. It's just environment available. Some other models, like logistic regression, for example, would use absence data. So you should be sure, which is pretty difficult, you should be sure that the species is not there. Okay? Then in the practice, it's a bit more gray, but those are the assumptions of the model. Okay? So to do that, to create these background points, basically we will create random points, but with certain conditions. No, I don't want the background points to be the same points as the presence points. Okay. So what I will do first is just to create like a buffer around the presence points. And then I will combine those circles, those buffers, with the landmass of my image, because I don't want background points in the sea. There won't be mosquitoes in the sea, okay? And with all that, I will create a mask. And once I have the mask, I will inform the v.random command where it has to put the points, the background points. Okay, so this is what we will do in these 4 cells. Yeah, so here, I don't want points here. No, I don't want points here. Oops.
You
Yep.
answer an online question?
Yes.
And he's asking, have the input data points already been filtered to avoid potential bias or double counts? Or would it be a separate step similar to using the buffer for the background points?
Yeah, the input data, like the mosquito records, were already filtered by date and for repeated occurrences. So sometimes there's one researcher, for example, reporting several occurrences in very near areas, like, I don't know, 10 meters difference. That will, in a 1 kilometer pixel, that will represent the same condition. So I must count it only once, not twice. And then that filtering was already done. Also in the GBIF data set, some people add a lot of metadata that allows you to make decisions about them, but others don't. And you only have the coordinates. And then it's there for you to decide if you go with it, like blindly, or if you apply more strict criteria to filter out data. And some of them, for example, provide data about uncertainty, or there is very old data, like from the 50s. And then if you are using climate data from the 2020, it's like, well, from the 50s, perhaps it was a similar species, and back then it was not determined. So there are also taxonomic issues. It's not that simple in the end, but it is possible. And yeah, you have to make compromises. I hope that answered the question.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. Okay, so let's go with it. We create the buffer then with b.buffer. And we set a distance of, I set a distance of 2 kilometers, which is very conservative. For the most used movement range for mosquitoes is something like for Aedes, at least for the sister species, Aedes aegypti, is something like 100, 150 meters, because they are supposed to be around houses. And that's it, searching for breeding sites to lay their eggs. But some people have registered something like 800 meters. So to be conservative, I just said like kilometers to create the buffer. Okay, here, for example, we set the region just to be sure. We reset it, let's say. And then with raster algebra, we create an expression to basically mask the land, no, in the raster map. So what this expression means is wherever there is data in this map, put 1, otherwise put null. And this creates a land. And I directly call it mask in caps, because if you have a raster called mask like that in your map set, it directly applies it. So it's the same as running rmask, r.mask. Okay. And then I convert that raster mask to a vector, because I need to overlay it with the buffers. And then I do the overlay. Okay. So what should be the output of that? Do you know? Yes.
Like an area, like circles around the BBIX.
Yes.
Mosquito points.
And
The area outside of those circles.
Yes.
In Italy.
Yes. So it will be like a map of Italy, kind of cut with holes. That would be the mask, right? So it's the region because I converted to vector, only the land part, and overlay it with the buffers. Okay, those are the holes where there are presence records. Right? So all the rest of the land is available for background points. And now we use v.random to generate 1000 background points. Usually the default in Maxent is the 10,000. I just thought it was like too much for that area. It's very disproportionate. How you say that? Like
Disproportionate.
disproportionate. Okay. I set a seed only to, so you get the same result. Okay, so now let's display everything. You see here, I again use the non-interactive map class, and I add rasters and vector data. Okay, so we have our presence records and our absences, not absences, well, background. Okay, so the response variable is ready. We have presences and backgrounds. Now we move to the predictor variable part and start deriving variables from our time series. What time is it? Oh, okay. Yeah. Perhaps we reach, yeah, we see where we get, at least create the time series and register. Yeah, perhaps here, no? Well, let's see. We have 12 minutes. Yes. So first step, create the time series. Basically create the empty object that we hold the metadata of our maps. Okay. For that, we use tcreate command. We tell the command that this will be a raster time series as truths. We say it is absolute time, so it's calendar dates. We give a name to it and then a title and description. Then basically we check if the object is there, is created with t.list. So t.list with list time series in the map set. Okay, so there's our time series, LST daily, and this at Italy LST daily is this time series at this maps. Now, once we have this empty object, we want to add timestamps to maps and register them there. And this we do with the tRegister command. So we pass the empty object as an input, and we need to create either a file with one map per line, or we create a list and we pass the list, like comma separated list of maps. And since our data is daily, we say, okay, the increment is 1 day, and you should start in January 1st, 2014. So it will, since it's daily, it's easy because the command just do all the time stamping for us. When the dates are like not regular, then sometimes you have to create the text file with the file names and the dates. Okay, but in this case, it's easy. You just give the increment and the starting date, and for the command, it's just magic. And we also say that data is interval type. Why interval type? Because it is an average of 4 passes per day. So the interval is 1 day. So it will have start time and an end time. Good. I don't have the map list. Okay, so here I create the map list. First of all, so I basically list the rasters with that pattern in the map set. Okay. Clear the output. Which one?
Like the blue bar that's next to it.
Wait. Ah, this one. Oh. Oh, that's great. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. That's a nice one. Okay, so now we register. It will take some time as they are 1800 maps. Yes, and the next thing is just to ask for information. So we check it was there. The next step will be to get the info, the basic info of the struts object. Okay. Afterwards, once that finishes, we will start generating variables. And the first thing that we will do is to create these long-term monthly averages. I used to call them climatologies, but to be strict with the word climatology should be called something like 30 years of data aggregated. And here we are only using 5, but the concept is the same. So it's these long-term averages. And what we will do is basically pick all the Januaries of the time of the maps from January from the time series, all the Februaries and so on, and do averages, minimum and maximum. Okay, we will need this for the next step. And okay, let's see if this okay. Yep.
Can you talk about why we are doing the time series map for the current data instead of doing something like looking at all the occurrences for the time period?
Okay, let me see if I understand the question. What we are doing, so if you want to predict the distribution in places where you don't know, where you don't have the occurrences, actually what you want to know is how suitable is the rest of the environment where you don't know that the species is for this species. Okay. And to use 1800 maps to doing that doesn't really make sense. Because also those maps are per day, so they won't be reflecting a pattern of how the temperature works there. And that's why we are trying to sum up these variabilities somehow and use this sort of reduced variable, reduced time series as predictors. Because our assumption is that those variables will represent the patterns and the usual fluctuations of that environment. And that would be representing the suitability of the habitat for the species. Is that responding your question? Sort of? Yeah. Okay. And you will see later why we use daily data. You will see later that we estimate a variable like consecutive days with temperature less than -10. Okay? Because this is something that mosquitoes cannot survive. You have perhaps one day with -10, they are still alive. Some are there still and can generate like a new generation of mosquitoes next summer. But if you have like 5, 10, 20 days like that consecutive, then there's no mosquito that can survive that. Okay. For that, we need this daily part, because otherwise we would use just monthly data. Why bother? No? But some indexes, for some indexes, you need daily data, higher temporal resolution. Okay, let's see if this. Okay, it's finished. And this is what you get out of t.info. So now the empty object is full with data, with metadata of our maps. And we get this summary of the time series. Okay, so with name and who created it, when, which semantic type, when is the start date, start time and end time of the whole time series, the granularity, the temporal type, so it's interval, and then some spatial information and summary of metadata, like the minimum value of all the means and the maximum value of all the marks and so on. And I want to mention this as well. This is a new metadata class, and it's especially useful for remote sensing images, for satellite images. We called it, after a lot of discussion, we call it semantic labels. At the beginning, it was band reference, but the concept is that aside from the date, the start and end date, and so on, you can also assign a label to the data and say, well, this is band 1 data, or this is red data, this is blue, this is green, this is near infrared. And that allows you to register in the same time series scenes, complete scenes, like the whole bunch of bands that you get from satellite images. And afterwards, you are able to do selections within a single time series if you want to estimate NDVI for it. So you just select like the red and the near infrared and do your calculate your index. In this case, since this is just LST, we are not writing the semantic label. But if we would have an, I don't know, NDVI and LST, and we wanted them for some reason in the same time series, we could have that. We just need to say, okay, this image is LST, this one is NDVI. That's it. And as you see, we have 1,826 maps. And here again, we have, since I passed the list, it extends like the object, the list map, so it's like long. And we will use the trick here again. Okay, yes, this is time to make. Okay, we will have to go very fast in the next part. It's up to 12.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's kind of better.
Yeah, perhaps just 10 minutes, 15 maximum.
You can do 10.
Okay.
Just so that much.
Oh my God, I'm freezing.
The hot water is there.
So let's do 10 and we're back.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah. Great.
That will be covered.
Yeah.
the maintenance. Like sometimes you can set it to some rooms. But basically it's you have to. This room is really cold. It's not, but then. Okay, let's go with it. Yes.
I need
There's some back.
You guys are in your study area.
No, it's when it's cold outside, you are cold. When it's, it's winter, when it's summer, you are cold. You can do it. That's, you know.
Yeah.
Really perception. I mean, you know that she's gonna do here, so I don't know it's not. At least,
Okay, let's move on. So now here, we start with these long-term averages. The important part here is we use this TRUST series command that allows us to aggregate full time series or parts of it. And in this case, we just create like an example. We want maps whose start time month is January, okay? So this is the syntax to select per month. Let's say if we here put, I don't know, week, there are like different variables that we could use. If we there put week, and we want all the maps for the first week. So we can play with this a little bit to create lists of maps according to our needs. So here we just do this kind of toy example only for January, and then we will expand that for the whole for all the other months. Good. So let's get some info of this map. And it kind of makes sense for the whole January maps to have the minimum temperature in -20. So remember, these are the Alps. And it's Celsius, sorry. Well, for me, it makes complete sense. Celsius. And the maximum in 9 degrees. I don't know the conversions for Fahrenheit. My room was 75 last night. I don't have idea how much it was. Good. And it gives us also the information on how it was created. Okay, and the timestamp. So the timestamp now, since this is a long-term average, it occupies like almost the full time series, no? From the 1st of January to the 1st of February, because it's an open-ended interval. This is why here it's not 31st January. Good. Now, let's do the same, but for all the other months. Okay, so first we test just getting the lists of maps, so to see if it works. So TRUST list allows us to first create the lists to see if we are getting what we want, and then we use the same where clause here in the other commands. So then we will use this same where here, right? In the TRUST series within a for loop for different methods, okay? So basically we create a list with all the months. We format them as 01, 02, and so on, because that's how they appear in the date string. And now we replace the 01 here in the previous command with M. Okay. So we run this one, we will get tons of maps. But this is the classic, let's say, output of TRUST list, in which we see the map name and the start and end date. So here you see that intervals are open, right? Oops, sorry. So it's the start date is January 1st, the end date is 2nd of January, which coincides with the start date of the second one. Right?
Maybe we want to explain what month is.
Yes. That one. Good. I want to shrink this again. Okay, and so now, aside from months, we use also methods. We want the average, the minimum, and the maximum for all the months. And basically now it's two nested cores. And we replace the method and the month now in the output name months. Okay. Okay, this will also take a while, probably. Why we need this, these long-term averages or climatologies? Because we will then estimate these bioclim variables, which are variables usually they are estimated with precipitation and temperature. And for species distribution modeling, it's really, really common to use these kind of variables because they represent limiting conditions for species, like precipitation of the driest month, or temperature of the coldest month, or of the warmest quarter, and so on. So these represent limiting conditions for the distribution of the species of animals and plants. So they are very common in species distribution model. And there's an extension in GraphJS called r.bioclim that allows us to estimate them if we pass these long-term averages for temperature, like T-mean, minimum, maximum, and precipitation if we would have that. In this case, we will only estimate the bioclimatic variables that use temperature, because we're not working here with rain. We could have, but it would have been quite longish. It's already a long workshop. So basically, while we wait for it to finish, basically what we do is create the lists for the LST minimum maps that we are now creating. So for the minimum, for the max, and for the average. And we pass them to the r.bioclim command. Okay, the output will be, could have put bioclim here. Bioclim, and that's the suffix, the prefix for the name. Okay. Wait, it is still running. It has to do like all the listing and so on. Do you have any questions? No. Cannot continue. It is not finished. Yes. Okay, it's done. There are serious has and pro. Okay, that's one thing. Okay, now we get a list of the maps that we just created, and so it looks like this. These are not time series. These are like separate maps, not within a time series. So average for January, February, and so on. This was the one that we created at the beginning. The maximum and the minimum. Okay. Well, to avoid confusion, we will just remove the one that we created at the beginning with Jan, to avoid confusion then when using the list. It's paralyzing. Okay. So we then install with G.dot extension, we installed r.bioclim. And we create the list of maps to pass to the command later on. Okay, we create the minimum, maximum, and average temperature list of maps. And we pass to our bioclim to estimate these bioclimatic variables. They will be called like bio1, bio2, bio3. I think I put a link in case. Yeah, so you can have a look at r.bioclim, and here are the definitions. Right, so bio 01 is annual mean temperature, bio 02 is mean diurnal range, and so on. You see, it's like when you don't use rainfall, you do not estimate these kind of variables. For example, mean temperature of the wettest quarter, because you don't have precipitation to estimate that, but you can estimate the mean temperature of the coldest month, the max temperature of the warmest month, and so on. Those are all limiting factors for species, especially for insects. Okay, now we list, this is done, we list. Okay, so we see, we estimated those that we could only using temperature, and we will display some of them. Here I displayed 2 of them, then they can like turn on and off the layers. Okay. Oh, you wanted to. Me and the map, okay. Okay. Okay, we estimated some of these bioclim variables. Now we will estimate a couple of variables that represent slopes. Okay. One is called spring warming, and the other one is autumnal cooling, let's say. And basically, this is the slope of all the average temperature maps of, in this case, February, March, and April. So how fast it gets warm. And the same for autumnal cooling is how fast it gets cool. Because this might be representing how fast mosquitoes stop reproducing or die, basically, if it is winter. Okay? This is also used for ticks, for example. So again, we have the months. And now we aggregate per year. We select first the months that we are interested in. So for spring warming, it's all the maps from February, March, and April, right? And we do this similar to what we did before, no? But we add like 3 different conditions in this case. No? It's one or the other or the other. So we combine per year, because it's one slope month per year, because it can differ per year. The method is slope, and we use this trust aggregate command in this case. This is the command that allows us to aggregate data with granularity. Okay, so here we could also write like month, day, 3 months, 4 years. So the granularity we choose. Okay. Let's run this. Hope it does not take forever like the previous one.
So your way to calculate everything across here, like December and January.
Yeah, when you can, like, if you want the slope for the whole year,
Or just for just December and January. Across the year.
yes, you would use T-Rust series as before. So instead of using average here in the method, you would use slope. And you get the slope for the whole year. Or you use, again, T-Rust aggregate and say 1 year. You do not select any month because the granularity will be 1 year and you put slope. So there are like different ways to reach the same result. Okay. Now let's see that the map is there. The maps are there. So we have one per year. And what we do is to aggregate that with an average to get only one map as a predictor variable and not 5. Okay. We could also estimate the standard deviation of that, the variability of that increase rate. In this case, we just estimate the average of the 5 maps. And we display it below. Okay.
May I ask about the map?
Yes.
We don't have a legend there, and everybody knows that I always ask about the legend because I'm trying.
The
to
legend
understand
and
what is, and it's easy to add the legend. But I was wondering, like, yeah, about that area. Why it is like, is dark blue very low or dark?
yes,
Okay.
dark
so-
blue is very low. This is water. This is Garda Lake.
Oh, okay.
So
I
it
see.
will, the temperature will increase really, really slow.
Slowly.
Mhm. And in this part, which is the Fall River Valley, is more humid, more hot, and so on, it will increase faster. It's surrounded by mountains on both sides. Okay, now we do pretty much the same, but with a different subset of maps, and we estimate the autumnal cooling. How do you pronounce autumnal? Autumnal cooling? Okay. Sometimes I try to Spanishize the word, the words. Yeah. Yeah, then you get the reviewers, like they check your affiliation and make it checked by a native speakers, and then native speakers invent words. Okay, so we do. This is pretty much the same. That's why I go fast. It's similar, not just different selection of maps. Okay. Now you see the water in water is just different, no? Good. So far we have the bioclim variables, spring warming, autumnal cooling. And we will estimate a couple more. Let's see if it doesn't take forever. These thresholds might change. This is the wild guesstimation. Ideally, mosquitoes thrive in certain conditions. And according to lab studies, it is more or less between 20 something and 30 something, not more than that, because then they also desiccate. It's too hot for them. So let's assume they thrive between 20 and 30 degrees. What we will estimate is the annual number of days which meet that condition. Okay, and then we will aggregate those yearly maps to only a single map. This will. Okay. So in this case, we use T-Rust algebra, which allows us to do a lot of spatial and temporal algebra operations. And it allows us also to use topology. This one is a pretty simple expression. The next one will be a bit more complex. But here, basically, we said, okay, if each map in this LST daily time series is higher or equal than 20 degrees and lower or equal than 30, count it as one, put one, otherwise put null. Okay. So basically, we will have another daily time series with a bunch of ones and zeros according if the map or the pixel meets the condition or not. Okay. The thing is, the student always says that T-Rust algebra is safer. That's why I use algebra, because T-Rust MapCalc does not know about dates, but T-Rust algebra does, because by design does. That's why I use this. So, okay, I would have to go. This is kind of annoying that it prints it checks all the conditions and prints them. Annoying. And what we will do once that is done is aggregate those counts, those maps with ones and zeros per year. Okay. With the method count. So it will count how many times each pixel has one. Okay. The zeros, it won't count. It only counts different than zero. And then we can estimate either an average for the 5 years or a median, for example, to use as a predictor variable afterwards. I should have put npros. Did I use npros here? No, 7.
I'm not sure what the resources are.
Yeah, me neither.
Oh, anyway.
Yeah. Well, this was for my computer, but even if it didn't finish, I do this. It's okay. Okay. So the next thing, meanwhile, I explain the next one, which is a bit more complex. So the same way there are these temperature thresholds on which mosquitoes can thrive, or different species can thrive, there are limiting thresholds because mosquitoes or their eggs cannot survive. Okay. And these are, for example, lower temperatures. And in this case, we will try to find, as I was saying before, the number of consecutive days with very low temperature. Do not get surprised then for the number, the output number, because it will be high, like, I don't know, half of the year or 90 days with the consecutive days with degrees of -10, less than -10. But these are the Alps, so it can be like pretty cold. And what we do here, it's a bit more complex because we have to evaluate like current map, one before, and the next one. Okay, and so what we do first is to create a kind of empty time series with annual annual granularity. And then if there is data there, we add 0, basically. So basically we are creating a time series with annual granularity, and everywhere is 0, except where there's the C. What we will use this for, this will be like our base, kind of, to evaluate the condition if one day is -10 and the previous one 2, we add 1. So we add 1 to this annual mass, no? And if the next one is also -10, we add 1. And at the end, we will just aggregate this annual mass, because it's 5 years, into a single mass. Okay, and more or less, this is. Let me check the condition. Oh, it's okay. It's only the number. Before it was 2. So the number remained 2. The condition is fine. So basically what we do is, let me try to get it. We add to the right-hand time series, we add whatever is in the left condition, okay? So this is the left. And this is the topological relationship. This is annual granularity, the one in the right, in the left, I'm sorry, and the other way around. This is annual granularity, and we are evaluating something daily to add into the annual granularity, okay? And what we do is evaluate if the current map is lower than -10, and the previous one is also lower than -10, or if the following map is lower than -10 and the current map is lower than -10, then if those conditions are met, or one of those, we put 1. Otherwise, I mean, we add 1 to the annual mass in that pixel. Otherwise, we don't add any. So it's a bit tricky, but what we get here is then an annual time series with different counts, basically, per pixel, according if there were consecutive days meeting that condition or not. And then we basically aggregate those 5 maps with counts into one map, only one map, with the median. I chose the median because we are talking about like integer number of days, and I thought that would be better than estimating an average, but it's just up to you. Oh, let's see if the other one. Okay, finished. Good. So now we aggregate per year. What time is it? Come on. We check the list of maps. So you see, it's almost like 100, almost 6 months of days that are potentially good for mosquitoes to thrive. But in some other years, it's a bit less. And with that, we estimate an average. We could also use the median there. And display the results. Okay. So the best part of Italy for mosquitoes is this, the whole river valley, basically. But they are invading the Alps as well. Okay, so now let's move forward with this one. And perhaps while it is finishing, we can start the art. Because this algebra expression, this one takes. Can I do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's make as if it has finished. There are, of course, different other variables that could be estimated. If you like study a bit or research a bit on the ecology and the biology, physiology of these mosquitoes, and some of them are, for example, different thresholds, accumulating temperature, for example, as we saw yesterday, with the extrinsic incubation period. And for that, you would use T-Rust accumulate and T-Rust detect, which are very useful for a lot of insects. These growing degree days are really, really useful measure. Okay, now let's move then, see if it works, to, let's go here to Launcher and open RStudio. So let's move to the modeling part. And then once you are in RStudio, go to File, Open File. Then this is just the structure of the whole table. So go to Work directory, then Workspace, so Work, Workspace, and we will open this notebook. Notebook example SDM R. And QMD. Okay. Now, once there, you can choose the visual, like it should be, probably it's there in source, choose visual, and you get like a nicer view. Okay. I want to check if the other one. Oh, good, great. So you see, only in the mountains, there are a lot of days, a lot of consecutive days with -10. It's like more than 6 months, like that. Also remember that this is land surface temperature and not air temperature. Oh, it's different. When it's cold, it's colder, and when it's hot, it's hotter. Good. Okay, so let's start with this one. In this case, then, we will use this rGrass library that was written by Roger Vivant with some contributions of some of the grass people and other guys. And it has a couple of functions, let's say. The one we use to initiate grass from R is this init grass. And basically, we also need to pass as the same as we did with GJ init. We need to pass the grass data, the location of the map set, and where the grass binaries are. Then the exec grass command that allows us to execute grass commands from R, and it's a wrapper again. And the readback and read rust functions that allows us to read data that we have in our grass data into R, into Terra objects. Terra is a new package that is replacing the raster package. This one, these two were written by Robert Hymans, the one that did the word clean. Right? And the same way we have the read part, we also have the write part. So we can write back into grass from R. So in R, we will be working with Terra representations of our raster maps within the grass data. And then we write them back. Okay. Okay, there are different ways of using R with grass or grass with R. Basically, we will be following one of them, which is starting grass from scratch within RStudio or R. You could also open a terminal of R within grass if you want. This allows us to more visualizations and so on. I'm pretty used to use it like this. So we will be working now in this part of the workflow, okay? In the modeling part, and then in the evaluation of the modeling part, in prediction and evaluation. So second half. And there are several packages to do species distribution modeling. We will be using one called SDM-Tune. It was written by a guy in Switzerland. I think it's Sergio Vignali. You have the references at the end. And it allows to do a lot of things with species distribution modeling, including like training different type of modelings, selecting variables, selecting models, tuning hyperparameters. So a lot of things that allows us to get the best possible configuration of model. Okay, so first we import all the packages that we need. So remember, just to run the whole chunk, just press the little triangle here. So that will run everything for you. So it loads all the packages needed. And now we, again, as we did in Python, we provide all the information about location, map set, and so on, and we start grass with init grass. Okay. And we get all the information. So we get information about this, about the connection, that the connection is being made, let's say. And basically it's the printing of the region and the projection data. Now we read the vector data. So we need the occurrences and the background points. Okay. And we will convert them to simple features to be able to plot them with map view. Forget about the warning. They are just warning. So nothing to worry about. It's complete and it's complete. So. And this map view is something similar to what we do with the grass Jupyter, but it allows us to see information about the points, for example. Oh, this point number, something, and like that. It also allows us to change base map, and so on. It's a really nice way to quickly visualize it. Then we read the raster data that we have been generating, okay? And what exactly will we be reading is these aggregated variables that we estimated, okay? So we will import or read in all the word claim variables, all those that are averages, and the one that is a median, okay? Now, then we will print them. So it's fine. So these are the word claim. Here I'm running only one by one. Okay. Basically, what I do is just create different lists of maps. You see, I use xspec, grass, and glist with pattern to get lists of maps from grass. Then I concatenate those lists and basically use a for loop to import them, okay, with read grass. And then I convert these multiple rasters into just one multiband raster. Okay. Forget about the warnings. Good. Now, let's visualize. So to visualize in map view, I am reconverting the Terra objects into raster objects. Still not supported. It gets like really big here with this. Okay, but here we see like the presence records and one of the maps in the stack. Okay. Now, the next step is to prepare the data for the modeling. Basically, we combine the presence records with the background data, and we extract the environmental information from the rasters for those points and create a table. Okay, this is everything we do here. The model trains with the table, and then we predict all over the rest of the space. Okay. So this is what we do here, like getting the coordinates and using this prepare sample with data table. If there are null data in some of the locations, it lets you know. So. And then it creates this kind of summary information. Okay, so you see we have all the variables that we have estimated. Now we define some relevant variables for the modeling part, like the seed, the percentage of the sample that we will assign to test as a test data set, the number of folds that we will use for cross-validation, the method, the correlation threshold for selecting variables, the number of permutations, and the importance threshold. Okay, we will see then when we use it. We use them. Okay, so here we will use cross-validation. That means that while we are training, we are also testing. But first of all, we need to separate, in this case, a 20% of the whole sample for evaluation at the very end of the process. So the training of the model won't see this 20% ever. Okay. So basically, with train val test, we create these different samples. We can explore them. So for the training, we will have only 66 presences, and for the test, 17. As you see, this modeling can handle like small numbers, number of occurrences. If you then use random forest, for example, it does not really work well. with such unbalanced information. Okay, then we create the folds for the cross validation. As there are very small number of presences, we only create 4. It's like shy number of folds. We will follow this full model approach. So first, we put everything there, basically in a bag, all the variables, all the occurrences, everything there, and we call that full model because it will use all the predictors. Okay, and from there we will start selecting variables. Okay. So basically we just train a model, the full model. The method is maxent, the data is what we created before, train data set, and the folds are the folds that we create. Okay. For method in this package, you could also use other things like GLM, random forest, SVM. Okay. And the model is something like this part of object of class SDM, species distribution model, cross validation, method is maxent, which species, how many replicates, so on, and all the variables. Okay, now let's see the prediction. So this is the model trained only for the data frame with the occurrences and the background data. But we want to see how it looks in the back, so how that equation works for all the other pixels. So we use predict for that. So train for training, predict for predicting, kind of. We say over which data it has to predict. So the data we defined at the beginning, mental. And we should see here. Ta-da. Was this your problem, Anna, that you didn't see the map? Yesterday it was working. Done. I only did this one. Good. So you see, it's not very good. only by seeing it, it's not very good. So it's mostly 0 everywhere except in some little parts in the coast and so on. Indeed, it is not a very good idea to just remain with a full model, no? Because there are interactions among variables and is repeated information that we usually want to take off. So let's start with that. Let's start with variable selection. One of the things that we can do is remove variables that are highly correlated. Okay, so we set a threshold before of 0.7. Okay, so 70%. Some others use 0.8, whatever. A bit arbitrary, but kind of common sense. Okay, and what this will be doing is training models. First, it identifies which are the pairs of variables that are highly correlated. And then it trains models with and without those variables and estimate a performance measure. And it will eliminate that variable that produces the least change. So it will keep the one that when you eliminate produces the higher change, the largest change, and remove the other from the correlated pair. Okay, so it's an iterative process. And for that, we use this function, parser variable selection. Okay, so we pass the full model. We say with which performance measure to assess the performance. And then we pass also the correlation threshold and the number of permutations. This one takes a little while. It does not have that much memory available. Look. Perhaps it's just two. That's not very good. After that, we will see which variables remain. But after that, the second thing that you can do is remove the less important variables. So if the contribution of one variable to the explanation is, let's say, 1%, well, you can proceed to that, no? You can just deprecate that. And so we set a threshold also for importance, for percentage of contribution of, I think it was 10 as well. Yeah, because we are using the same, same threshold. See, okay, 50%. And even after that, you could do hyperparameter tuning. We are not doing it here because it takes a lot of time, but there are different methods to do hyperparameter tuning. And one is like grid method, where you define like from for the parameter feature classes, you define, okay, with one feature or with a whole bunch of features, and then for regularization, like from 0 to 50 in steps of X, creates a grid and tests all the combinations. The other way is to use these genetic algorithms that use this kind of population genetics view, in which they do not test the whole grid of combinations, but they use different rates like mutation rates, migration rates, and so on, to move over the grid of possible combinations. We are not doing this here, but the package allows to do that. Okay, so now we explore. Oops. Okay, it says all the variables. I ran that. Okay, so these are the variables that were removed. You see, so they are correlated, or they have like repeated information. And we ended up with 4 variables. Okay.
Is that normal to like
Yeah.
lose like most of the?
Yes, it is. It is. And you want that actually, because that means that the model is simpler. Yeah.
So there's that as a variable reduction technique. What about using something like this component analysis? You like prefer to approach one first, try the other?
I usually prefer this because I know what the variable is. In principal components, it's a principal component, and it's made of the whole bunch of variables you put there. And yes, you have the eigenvalues and kind of the contribution of each variable to the component, but then the relationship with your response is really tricky to understand. And that's why I usually prefer just use variables in this case. When you don't care about the relationship, you only care about the prediction and that the prediction is good, but you don't care about the relationship or the explanation behind that. go with principal components, reduce variability, and so on. You have 3 variables and done. That's your predictors. Those are your predictors, and you don't worry to do variables. But if you care in the explanation of the mechanics, let's say the biology behind it, and so on, I prefer this.
One technical note, a couple of us had issue that like next cell just was not running.
This one?
Through the plate of it. No, it's just like one of those. And the trick is go to source, then go back to visual.
Okay. Good. So now we remove these less important variables. Since we have already 4 variables. Okay, see, it removes only 1. Usually it does not remove further, because if you selected the less correlated ones and so on, they should be important already. No? So in this case, it removed only 1. And this is like the summary object. Okay. Now, to predict, so we consider this last one the best model. Okay, we are not doing hyperparameter tuning in this case. And we are happy with this model. We consider this one is the best. Now, to make predictions, we have to recreate the raster stack of environmental variables, because now it's not the full list of variables that we created in GRASS, but only 3 variables. So basically, we obtain the names of those variables from the object, the reduced variable species object, which is a model. So like this, we explore within the object and we get the names of the variables that are retained. And then we subset the original stack of rasters with those names. Okay, we should end up with the raster stack now that has only 3 rasters. Here, we prepare again the table, but only with the 3 variables selected. We prepare again the train and test data sets. And we now do the training, not with cross-validation, but with the whole set of training. So with the 66 presences. The test data set remains there. No, we didn't touch it. And we use the feature classes and regularization of the best model. Again. In this case, it will be just default values because we didn't tune these hyperparameters. But in case you tune, then this is useful because you get whatever the best model was. So when you train like that without cross-validation, it's pretty fast. And now we make it predict. It takes a while to do. Hola. How are you? Anxious person here. Yeah. Okay. You see, it's pretty different than the original one. It's a bit more realistic. The probabilities are like distributed in a different way. The only weird thing for me that probably we should have masked is the water. See, for Garda Lake has the coast of Garda Lake, that's still water and it has high probability. So perhaps we should have masked water because we don't expect mosquitoes to live in the water. But we can also mask afterwards. So for the paper, we fix it a little bit. Good. And now what we do is just write the results back to Grasp. For that, we use this write Rust function. We pass the map object and we give it a name. And we say override to just. Okay, then we check it is there. So with exec grass, I'm executing commands in grass. And it is there. Now, what we can do is just go back here. We add a cell, and let's say we copy this. And let's display it also here. So here we need the other map name. See, this works. Yeah. It gets a different color table, no? So here it looks like it's this. But it is there. Yay! It works. Okay. And the next step, okay, we still have time. What we do then with the model is perform some model evaluation. So we want to know the performance of the model. In these cases, we usually use this AUC measure. It means area under the curve. And which curve? The receiver operator curve, which plots sensitivity and specificity models. All because we are thinking about presence and kind of absence, no? This is why we estimate these kind of measures. And an AUC of 0.5 would mean like model performs like random. Okay, so we are looking for values, I would say ideally above 0.8. Okay. So let's see. And for this, we use the test data set that we separated at the very beginning. Okay. 0.86, we are very good. But remember, we are testing with only 17 presences. So yeah, we should probably have more. No? But wait. And then what we can also do is use certain thresholds to evaluate. Why thresholds? Because sometimes we want a binary map of present substance. So what we obtained here in the other one, in this one, are probabilities, okay, which is 0 and 1. But sometimes it's good, I don't know, for health authorities or so, to just present where you consider these probabilities become presence, okay? And so you do this kind of threshold dependent validation or valuation. And these thresholds are known thresholds, for example, where the specificity and sensitivity and specificity curves meet, or the sum of them, or the maximum value. There are like already defined thresholds that you could use. And then you evaluate the model there, how it, how it behaves there, okay? So you could use as threshold the minimum training presence. This is, which is the minimum probability of a presence record in the prediction map, okay? It's really low. Okay, you don't omit any training data, but then you get all the area as presence almost, okay? So it's also a compromise. Now, in equal sensitivity and specificity, you get 0.5 as the threshold for presence or absence, okay? And with this, you get the 28% of the area as presence. And you have an omission rate, so you are omitting 27% of your presence records. And so on. This is how you evaluate and you compromise. And basically, it's on you which one you consider most important. If omitting presences or making mistakes with absences. Okay? I would be fine with this one, with 0.5. Good. Okay, and let's try to do that then. Okay, we have 0.5, and we kind of filter our map with this threshold, and we put 1s for values higher than 0.5 and 0 to values lower than that. We display. And we have a binary map. We could have also displayed only the presence part, which sometimes looks nice. So the cold and the mountains are kind of sort of a barrier. Here,
Yeah.
there's also some hills here, like Piemonte. So this is a low area, like valley. These are hills and down here. Here it should be full of mosquitoes. Okay, and the next thing that we are interested in obtaining is, which is the variable importance or variable contribution of each of the variables that remain selected. Okay, so the most important in this case is where are the optimum, let's call them optimum conditions for mosquitoes to thrive. And then bio7, so we should go back. No, let's do this. Our bioclim. And see what bio7 was. Bio7 is the temperature annual range. Okay, so it's max temperature of warmest month minus the mean temperature of coldest month. Okay, this range of temperatures. And the bio4, which is temperature seasonality. Okay, it's the standard deviation of, I think it was this one. Please. Okay, so it kind of makes sense. You can also plot that. And the next thing is to create response curves. These response curves are basically plotting the relationship between the probability of occurrence and the range of the variable. Okay, so you can see how is the relationship. If it is increasing, decreasing, a Gauss bell, or whatever. Okay, so and these are the relationships. So probability of presence. Some might be artifacts because we have a small sample, no? But let's say probabilities of presence increase where this was the standard deviation is around 8,000 something, 8,200. Okay, or they decrease with the seasonality. Or I would expect here like more like a Gauss thingy, with the number of days, but it's increasing again. This part can be also an artifact. But as you see, there is a number of days in which it kind of reached a plateau. Yeah, and basically that's it. We went very fast through the modeling and validation workflow. But as a disclaimer, this is only like pretty much a toy example. And the thresholds are more or less true, but not necessarily the exact ones. There are many other models that we could test and then create ensemble of models to obtain like a mean prediction of all models and the standard deviation. We can do this hyperparameter tuning that we didn't address. Yes, the hyperparameter tuning. So the case of Maxent has two types of hyperparameters. One is the feature class, which is which type of relationship you allow the model to fit among the presence and the variable. And it could be linear, quadratic, there's something called hinge, and there's something else for categorical variables as well, like steps kind of. So you can select which type of features you would allow. So you can fit a model only with linear relationships. So here we see this kind of response variables because we allowed all types of features. So you get these different forms, different shapes. But if you only allow linear, you should only get like, or like this. And then the next parameter is called regularization, which is also present in several machine learning methods. And it's like a penalizing parameter. So the more variables you have, the higher it might get, so on. Here it just uses one, so everything is weighted the same. But you can also tune that. And then when you do this hyperparameter tuning, you get like a list of ordered by a certain performance measure models, and you choose from there. And this is why I used, where is it? This. Because if you get this list of models and you choose the best one, then you can get which feature classes were there in the best model and which regularization parameter is there. Instead of here, I could have written like one and classes. And so that, which other disclaimers I have? Ensemble model, uncertainty assessment. And this is also important. When you are going to predict overspace or overspace in different times, you should check if the conditions in new spaces or in new times are completely different of what you already use for training. Because if that's the case, you shouldn't predict over those areas because your model does not know what happened in those conditions. So you should also assess that. And here we just use one package to do everything, but there are many more packages to do species distribution modeling, and I put there some examples of them. But basically they all have most of these steps, okay, to do variable selection. And that's it for today. I hope I didn't mess with your heads too much. Yeah.
when it comes to model training on raster data, I guess two examples, like different visible bands, like NIR, green, red, blue versus temperature. What resolutions do you see the best success at, like in pixel size?
I think it depends on the problem and the extent of the area. This is also something we talked yesterday. This relationship between the scale of the phenomena you are trying to understand and the resolution of the data you have represent the variables that operate over that phenomenon. And for species distribution modeling, when you are working like in large areas, climate is like always a good choice, like temperature, rainfall, and so on. And also, if you use insects, then those are also good variables, let's say. Then if you want to predict, if you want to zoom in, let's say I want to zoom in one of the valleys in northern Italy, there, like Trento area, for example, I would use elevation, I would use vegetation variables, so because I'm more interested in a more local or landscape view. And there are things that could modify this general pattern or trend of temperature and rain. Yeah, so then I would go for Sentinel Landsat elevation and derive variables from there. No? Didn't show here, but you could derive like different texture measures. So you have your presence point here, but the conditions here might not really be that relevant as much as the context around that. And so you can estimate these kind of texture measures that consider the context of that point and get that data. And for that, you can use, I don't know, percentage of cover of different classes or a class that's important for your species or different other textures, contrast and variance and so on. Entropy. The bands as well, you can also use them. The problem with bands is that, I don't know, presence of mosquitoes with blue band. I don't know what that means. The near infrared, perhaps you can say something with vegetation, but the bands themselves, to explain, it's difficult. To predict, you can use them. You're interested in prediction only. Oh, any other question? Yes.
Since we're looking at this, would it have been possible to do this model on a smaller spatial extent? So instead of like 10, maybe like 10 or 5.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I've done that for the city of Cordoba, and we use once we use spot data, it's like 6 meters. It's a French satellite, 6 meters in the visible, and then they have a panchromatic band of 1.5 meters. So you can do the pan sharpening and get 1.5 meters resolution. And those kind of resolutions are especially useful for, I would say, urban areas, which you have like a lot of variability and in terms of meters, no? And the percentage of shadows there or vegetation in a neighborhood versus only buildings would make a difference in the suitability of the habitat for mosquitoes. So yes, if you zoom in, I would go with that kind of data. Any other questions? I'm really surprised it's 12 and 1 minute. Yeah, we made it.
Let's thank her.
Okay, thank you for coming. Yeah.
For high resolution mapping, does just have far levels of this?
That's what.
Yeah.
Yes, there are these R.li modules or R.I PI modules for patch statistics for landscape metrics. Or what you do is just get everything into grass and read it in R, and they have this landscape metrics package, which performs or calculates landscape metrics for all different scales, like the whole landscape, the patch, and what else was? Well, there was one more, I don't remember. And it's really useful, really easy. My student, the one I show you, the clustering of neighborhoods and so on, she used landscape metrics.
I think if you need something real simple, there's art of objective geometry.
Yeah. Yeah. Perimeter area.
Yeah. That's
And also the one that Moritz, the Stats also estimates different measures for the neighbors. So if you have an object, like, I don't remember the name of the module.
I think in the end it depends what I got.
Yes. Yeah. But there are options in Rust that you can use. Or move to R and go back. The nice thing of R, at least for me as a biologist, ecologist, and so on, is that there are many packages to do ecology stuff in R. And statistical modeling. And that's why I go with it more than with Python. But now I'm making friends with Python for the grass part. So yeah.
I do have one more announcement. Next week, Wednesday, that's April 19, we will have a mini code sprint in Hunt Library. So that would be a time where you don't necessarily have to contribute code to GrassGS, but like we can discuss things like the experience today, like, oh, there is just a ton of output from this thing. Actually, it's computing and we don't expect much text from it. So one thing is to actually make the fix, but in many cases, it's also about a discussion of how much output you want. It's maybe a little bit, what should be there. So there is a place to contribute, even if you don't want to necessarily go all the way there and change code in GrassGS, although you can do that too. So that would be in, sorry, not Hunt Library, the DHL library. And we will meet in 2310, but you can email me. And you don't have to come for a whole day, just come for an hour. But it would be a good idea to email me so I have you in mind that we don't leave the room.
No, also those kind of meetings are nice to have more informal chats, and perhaps you have an error in the module and, oh, this is a bug. Okay, let's report this, or let's test this fix, or let's add an example to this manual because it's difficult to understand. So all those contributions are really welcome, not only coding stuff. That's how I started in Grass. Basically, I am not a programmer. I started bothering devs with that kind of questions and problems. So it's good.